Hey everyone, Daniel here with Slow Haste. So if you're comfortable and familiar with the basics of the IMPORTANT Digitakt, then I hope this video will be helpful for you to kind of learn and implement different strategies on getting your stuff to just sound a little bit better and more professional and more interesting overall with the Digitakt. It's a complex tool with a lot of different features, and a lot of the features are very important to the general Electron workflow, and a lot of them are kind of more sound design specific, and I want to kind of go over some of those sound design specific tools with you today to show you how I like to implement them. So as an example throughout this video, I'm just going to play you the beat that we're going to be using, and this has a lot of these sound design adjustments made to it already. And this is part of a beat or a song, a jam that I put together that I will link in the card up here. You can go listen to the full thing if you so desire. But this is the basic idea and foundation that I build up to throughout the song. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the compressor on the Digitakt. And to access this, if you didn't know, you hold function and press the LFO to get to the master page, which looks like this. So as an example, if you're on another page, hold function, hit the LFO, and you're in the master compressor. So we're just going to play around as the song plays with the wet and dry. So this is totally dry, no compression. And I use a specific set of settings, and then I like to set the mix about 50-50, depending on the particular tune. And you can adjust the settings to taste as well to see how it affects the overall sound of things. I tend to take a really low ratio and a mid to low threshold. Just keeps everything nice and tight. And same with the attack and release. I like the settings to be relatively low. You can hear how those subtly affect the sound by just changing the attack and release of the compressor. But yeah, if you just play around with some of those master settings on any sort of beat that you even already have put together all the way, you'll be able to kind of hear how they very subtly affect the overall mix of the sound, or the master of the sound rather. And it's always good to adjust the makeup gain too, to make sure that if you lose any volume with the compression settings you have, you can compensate. So again, no compression whatsoever. And then the settings that I tend to use. So I hope you can hear a difference, although, however subtle it may be, that once you apply this sort of setting to any of your tracks, how it can kind of just get it to sound a little bit beefier. So the next thing I want to look at is the overdrive and bit crusher settings. And I specifically want to look at these two settings together because of how they tend to interact with each other when using them with percussion. I tend to overdrive a little bit of everything on all of my beats, including all of the percussive elements. So here we have the drums isolated from all of our melodic components. And I've brought the overdrive on the kick sample down to nothing. So let's isolate that and listen to how this affects the sample. And you want to compensate by turning the volume or the level of the sample down as you turn the overdrive up. And I'm just showing you the range of this. So you can hear that's quite a different kick sound than what we had before. Neither one or the other is better inherently, but I think this one has a little bit more character. And there are very few situations in which I would absolutely crank the overdrive like that. But it's fun to kind of get an idea for the range of sounds that you can get from that knob. And specifically, like I mentioned, I want to show you in the context of using the bit crusher as well. Something that I learned I really like doing recently is using the bit crusher on the kick sample when there's overdrive applied, because you get a little bit of a whisper of this sort of saturated percussive sound at the tail of the kick. And in combination with everything else, it can sound pretty cool. Let's get really obvious with it. The inherent sound quality and characteristic of the kick remains intact, but that tail adds a cool rhythmic component. And there it is without it. And there it is at a very extreme level, which is excessive in my opinion, but you can get really crazy and have a lot of fun. All right, I'll try to not do that. So yeah, definitely play around with how the overdrive and bit crusher interact on the Digitakt. There's a ton of experimentation you can do, and especially with complex percussion parts, you can get some weird rhythms going on that wouldn't be possible just using like the delay timing and micro timing and things like that. So a lot of fun. So the third element I wanted to talk about today is part of the Digitakt's most recent firmware upgrade, the 1.30, and it is the dual LFO. So you can go to the LFO page, and if you tap the button, you can see that there are 2 pages now. Typically, there's only 1 page of the LFO. And as an example, I'm going to use this main sample that is prevalent throughout the tune. So I have a couple of things going on here. One of them I just negated. Which is sort of a fake sidechaining effect that is sent to this sample via the LFO. So you can hear it's pretty straightforward, but as soon as I turn the depth all the way down, you can hear the volume drop at every downbeat. And what that does is it gives the sample room to breathe, because there's a ton of reverb, and it is it's the main idea, the main melody of the song, but you want to give the percussion some room to breathe too. So I always recommend with those sort of richer samples that you're using is to kind of program a little bit of side chaining. And you can also send this master compressor to the kick. I always have it sent to the main output, which is just going to kind of like get everything to work together with the compressor. This will cause it to sort of adjust volume in regards to the volume of the kick track, but that sets all of the other tracks to do so as well. I like that you can, by using the main compressor with the main outputs, using the LFO page to sidechain some of your samples gives you more rhythmic variation if you have a lot of melodic samples or different pads that you want to sort of like swell and undulate at different rhythms. It can be really useful. It's really obvious when you increase the BPM, but it's something you might not notice if I didn't even mention it, especially since I had the level a little bit more modestly set. But now let's take a look at the second LFO page. And here's another thing that I like to do to get things a little bit more, not necessarily like analog sounding intentionally, but a little bit more vibrant and warm and natural sounding in sort of a wonky way. I set the LFO, the second LFO, to the sample tune, and I just adjust the depth ever so slightly. We'll go with an extreme level here, and then I'll show you how you can dial off to get that sort of perfect, barely there setting. So you can hear that now, right? That's one out of tune sample. And that's nothing, right? Every cent matters here. And you can hear as I approach that sort of like negative 0.15, it becomes pretty obvious. You can get a more wavering sound by increasing the BPM. And if you turn the multiplier down, the BPM multiplier down, you can get away with relatively deep depth. It gets really forlorn sounding, but for a subtle sort of barely there effect that's still gonna make a difference to your overall mix, I recommend using, the default BPM multiplier, which is set to 16, using a sine wave, and then adjusting your depth somewhere within that negative 0.05 to negative 0.10 range. And it'll just add a nice sort of like subtlety and aliveness to your main samples. Let's play around with some of those other settings in the context of the full piece though. See what we can get away with. That's a bit much for me personally, as much as I love this kind of stuff. That's a little better. But yeah, I prefer, whoa, these little knobs are so sensitive sometimes. Yeah, I prefer something more like that. Anyways, play around to taste, but it's one tool that I really, really like to use, especially in congruence with these other, methods that I'm mentioning. These little things add up. And, I'm a huge proponent of spending the time to really get to know every little feature and figuring out and deciding where you can implement these together to make an impact, because they sort of multiply the effectiveness with each other when you use them all in tandem, in my opinion, to create some that's greater than its individual parts. Okay, so I'm going to play a copy of the pattern we were just on, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing for this fourth sort of method, and I want to see if you can tell a difference. I'm going to let you listen. And now we're going to jump back to our old pattern, and hopefully you'll be able to notice. So in case you can't tell what this next point is, which do you think sounds better? This pattern or this pattern? I'm gonna give you a hint. So this is without the modification. And this track is with the modification. If you couldn't tell right now, I'm talking about panning. So this track, or this pattern rather, has panning, and this one does not, has no panning. And I personally think panning is one of the most important effects, if you could call it that you can use on the Digitakt to make your stuff sound better, more legit, more professional, whatever you want to call it. It's a super easy tool, and especially even just with percussion. So this is the dry with 0 panning. You'll be able to tell it just sounds way more natural. And it gives you a more interesting listening experience, if nothing else. Whoops. So hopefully you can tell a difference between the percussion parts in these two patterns, right? Think of if you're listening to somebody play a drum kit. The drums aren't all stacked on top of each other in the same spot in the physical space where the drummer is. They're spread out a little bit. Think about how things would sound if you were sitting behind a drum kit playing the drums, and where the different sounds would be coming from and to, and then think about the same sort of perspective, but from an audience member's perspective. There are a couple of different ways of approaching that in mixing, but think about, putting cymbals a little bit farther off to the left or the right, and the snare you want to adjust a little bit, but a little bit closer to center where that snare drum usually sits. And most of the time the kick is going to be dead center, and probably should be for a mix purpose. But yeah, again, experiment, especially if you're using very non-traditional percussive samples like I am here. You can get kind of crazy with it. So just to show you, yeah, kick is center. Where are we at with this? Yeah, we're just like a very slight bit to the right with that sample on trigger 2. That's way over to the left. Way over to the right. and just a little bit to the right. So yeah, have fun with that. Really easy to mess around with, and I highly recommend putting some time into panning all of your parts. And sorry to be deceptive, but this is really only 4 tips, because the 5th thing you can do to get your Digitakt to sound better is just to practice with it, keep playing it, get off of YouTube and go play your Digitakt for the next 20 minutes before you go to bed rather than watching tutorials on it. That's really the best way to get better with it, is to just give yourself all that hands-on experience. That is, of course, unless you're watching more slow-paced videos. Anyways, I hope you have all had a really great holiday season and continued to do so. I hope you had a Merry Christmas if you celebrate that, and have a Happy New Year as well. Take care.